Good afternoon, dear honorable experts and participants of the International Forum European Meridian XXI. We are glad to welcome you at our online discussion, International Cooperation and Public Diplomacy during Pandemic Crisis, Challenges, Practices and Trends. The current pandemic crisis, unprecedented in modern history, has affected all spheres of public life. Last year, in 2019, organized the forum in Royal Institute of International Relations, Egmont Institute, with many distinguished experts. But this time, we organize our event together with Россотрудничество, Institute of Europe, and Primakov National Research Institute of World Economy and International Relations of the Russian Academy of Sciences. In new online format, and we should underline that we have very interesting and impressive amount of experts from different fields. Our moderator, Fyodor Lukyanov, editor-in-chief of Russia in Global Affairs magazine. We are very glad to welcome our experts from College of Europe, MGIMO University, Liège University, think tank Geopragma, Russian International Affairs Council, Center for Fine Arts Brussels, Beaux-Arts, Royal Institute for International Relations, Egmont Institute, International Cultural Program, Russian Seasons. The wide broadcasting led more than 200 participants from all over Europe to register and join the event, as well as follow it online in social media, our Facebook page and YouTube. I have the honor to give the floor to Mr. Alexander Tokovinin, Ambassador, Extraordinary Plenipotentiary of the Russian Federation to the Kingdom of Belgium.
Спасибо большое, Вера Георгиевна. Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Dear colleagues, I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to welcome the participants in the webinar held in the framework of the European Meridian 21 sessions. This series of discussions of topical issues of international life was conceived by Россотрудничество and its head, Eleonora Mitrofanova, who is now passing the reins of the organization to her successor. The first seminar, centered around the problems of migration, was held last year in Brussels in cooperation with the Egmont Institute. And I'm very glad that this initiative is being pursued, though now in online format, dictated by the circumstances. I would like to commend here the efforts undertaken for the success of this event by the head of the Russian Cultural Center in Belgium, Vera Bunina. The idea behind the endeavor is to provide a platform for professional exchange of views between Russian and European experts. It's quite obvious that the crisis the world is going through makes such exchanges even more pertinent. It is generally accepted today that the pandemic and its economic and other consequences accelerate change and pose a lot of important questions, including in international relations. Searching for answers for these questions presents a tremendous challenge for the expert community. Now, as the structures of the established order are becoming more fluid, it seems to be the time to suggest innovative ideas corresponding to the reality. The threat of increasing turmoil and chaos in global affairs makes it logical to suggest that strengthening the realist politics would be the right trend to follow. In this regard, I believe more serious thought should be given now to restarting meaningful cooperation on the European continent in a way that would help to cope with the current crisis in its various dimensions. As Foreign Minister Lavrov put it in his article, published a couple of days ago, the possibility to create an architecture of peace and stability on our common continent is still there. And he added that to move forward on that track, we all need strategic vision. A vision which, in a world of change, cannot be rooted in archaic concepts or ideological cliches, but can only be a product of goodwill and clear-eyed analysis. For sure, people-to-people contacts, cultural cooperation, and public diplomacy have a major role to play in trying to turn the tide of events in the European space in a positive direction. I hope today's conference will be a welcome contribution to these efforts. Let me wish you an interesting and fruitful discussion, and thank you for your attention.
Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And now I give the floor to Madam Eleonora Mitrofanova, Ambassador Extraordinary Plenipotentiary, who was the head of the Federal Agency Россотрудничества in 2017-2020 and was one of the initiators of this forum and this event.
Спасибо, Вера Георгиевна, большое. Уважаемые дамы и господа, я очень рада вас всех приветствовать. Я очень рада, что эта инициатива, которая так хорошо началась в прошлом году, продолжается. И я надеюсь, что это будет постоянная дискуссионная площадка здесь, в центре Европы. Надо сказать, что, конечно, вот это стремительное распространение коронавируса, все эти действия, которые предприняли правительство по изоляции, то, что наступили такие определенные последствия для экономики, финансов и вообще разбалансировки очень многих моментов нашей текущей жизни, политической жизни. Я думаю, что это еще ждет своих исследователей. И думаю, что в рамках вот Меридиана 21 еще можно будет чуть позже оценить все последствия вот того, что произошло. Здесь я, наверное, буду больше говорить о том, что мы как культурная институция, да, вот какие изменения мы почувствовали и что можно было бы использовать в дальнейшем в нашей работе. Надо сказать, что с началом пандемии международное взаимодействие в науке, культуре, образовании получило совершенно новые векторы развития, такие какие-то неожиданные. Нам казалось, что вот то, что пандемия прервет сейчас всю работу, запланированные проекты, но оказалось, знаете, даже наоборот, произошла какая-то неожиданная активизация. Это еще тоже требует своего, так сказать, такого осознания, то, что произошло. Надо сказать, что вот в области науки, например, произошла, собственно, переориентация, переход на онлайн-кооперации. Стали активно использовать цифровые платформы. Онлайн-доступ открылся во многих институтах к данным, к публикациям, к инфраструктуре. Мы это прекрасно видим на области медицины, когда усилилась кооперация в поисках, например, тех же, так сказать, вакцин против коронавируса и так далее. Пандемия стала стимулом к развитию всех форм того, что называется открытой наукой, да? Вот платформ, где собраны данные, наблюдения, экспериментов, открытого допуска к публикациям. ЮНЕСКО в своих недавних документах отмечает большое значение открытости науки. А Европейская комиссия в апреле создала онлайн-ресурс, на котором ученые из разных стран могут обмениваться данными и результатами исследований о коронавирусе, например, полученные как из национальных, так и из международных источников. Я не знаю, у нас переводчик, наверное, есть, да? Я, к сожалению, на английском не готовила это. Есть, да, переводчик?
Very good. Thank you.
В условиях пандемии расширилась международная кооперация в вопросах образования. Опять же, сошлюсь на ЮНЕСКО, да, ЮНЕСКО объявила об объединении своих сил с силами гражданского общества и партнеров в широкую коалицию по вопросам образования. Да. По данным того же ЮНЕСКО, закрытие школ из-за пандемии затрагивает 87% учащихся во всем мире. более 1,5 миллиарда учащихся в 165 странах. Это цифра, согласитесь. Коалиция заявляет о своей целью поддержку инициатив стран по расширению применения дистанционного образования и по поддержке детей и молодежи как группы риска в отношении доступа к образованию. Ну, кто имеет детей еще школьного там или институтского возраста, вот у меня сын сейчас бакалавриат заканчивает, мы прекрасно знаем, что институты, я бы сказала, если поначалу были сложности там в марте месяце, то сейчас даже госэкзамены принимают дистанционно. И это все проходит в совершенно таком нормальном режиме. Не уверена, что это говорит о том, что в будущем мы можем полностью перейти, скажем, на дистанционное обучение, потому что социализация детей важна, но тем не менее это огромное подспорье, и сейчас его апробировали в практическом режиме. Аналогичные формы развития международной онлайн-кооперации в рамках межуниверситетского сотрудничества в период пандемии также демонстрируют, в общем, свою эффективность, потому что увеличилось количество круглых столов, конференций в онлайн-формате. И я думаю, что для всех это стало определенной, ну, что ли, тестовой площадкой, что, может быть, в будущем не всегда нужно лететь на один день на край света для того, чтобы выступить с какой-то, так сказать, лекцией или с презентацией, а можно совершенно спокойно это сделать в онлайн-режиме. Огромное влияние оказала вот эта пандемия, да, или изоляция, на самом деле, на культуру. Она научила нас проводить культурные программы в виртуальном пространстве. И количество людей, которые получили доступ к онлайн-мероприятиям, несопоставим, надо сказать, с тем, что может вместить один музей или там театр за годы работы. Вот, допустим, Валерий Гергиев, художественный руководитель Мариинского театра, рассказал, что за 3 пандемических месяца его спектакли посмотрели 72 миллиона зрителей. Аналогичная ситуация у Большого театра. Тоже можно сказать о музеях. И мы это знаем по нашей собственной работе, потому что многие наши представители очень легко и плодотворно перешли на онлайн-работу, и аудитория значительно расширилась, потому что к мероприятиям во Франции, например, стали подключаться соотечественники и люди, которые интересуются со всех стран мира. Это было связано и с Днем Победы, особенно мы знаем, флешмобы там прошли по всему миру, пели песни, какие-то очень активную позицию и проявили себя выпускники российских и советских вузов. В общем, это было очень неожиданно. Но вот это вот, мне кажется, стоит сохранить и на будущее. Одним из важнейших направлений вот работы наших культурных центров являются курсы русского языка. В стационарном режиме на наших курсах обучается 19 тысяч человек по системе. Да? Вот. Учебный процесс во многих центрах перешел в онлайн и перешел достаточно успешно. Вот. Поэтому это и в Бельгии, и во Франции, и в Германии. То есть сформированы группы студентов по их уровню знаний, которые согласились и подключились к этой онлайн-подготовке. Тоже интересная вещь. Я уже не говорю о подготовке, переподготовке преподавателей, коими тоже занимается Россотрудничество. Это порядка 6 тысяч преподавателей русского языка и литературы, которые проходят и очно, и заочно. То есть у нас порядка 3000 преподавателей готовились очно, порядка 3000 заочно. В этом году все преподаватели будут, ну, я думаю, что практически до конца года проходить вот эту подготовку, переподготовку в онлайн-режиме. Поэтому мне показалось, вот это еще, вот я говорю, требует очень серьезного осмысления. Надо подумать. Я посмотрела, как работают другие культурные центры других стран, например, в Российской Федерации. Они тоже очень многие перешли онлайн, и мне кажется, это тоже находит свою такую поддержку. Поэтому думаю, что это определенный урок. В политическом плане, конечно, и в экономическом, финансовом требует серьезнейший анализ. Я думаю, что вот господин Лукьянов с нами, и Алексей Громыко. Я думаю, что вот ученые, они должны взять это в руки и, в общем, очень хорошо проанализировать, включая последние политические события, которые происходят в тех же Соединенных Штатах. Борьба с памятниками, которая началась в Европе, так сказать, уже с памятниками давней-давней истории. Вот к чему это все может привести. Поэтому, мне кажется, мы открываем цикл определенный для того, чтобы провести еще более глубокий анализ того, что есть. Спасибо вам большое за внимание. Я вынуждена извиниться, потому что должна уйти. Мой заместитель продолжит работу. Я желаю всем успеха и, надеюсь, очной встречи в недалеком будущем. Спасибо большое.
Спасибо вам большое, Элеонора Валентиновна. Спасибо, что нашли возможность и время в своем плотном рабочем графике сейчас присоединиться к нам. Хочу только добавить, что у нас сегодня тоже очень интернациональная территория, и вот только что задали вопрос из Мехико, например, на который мы обязательно ответим. Так что действительно и тема актуальная, и проблематика актуальная, и охват самый международный, какой и должен быть для этой проблематики сегодня. Спасибо вам большое.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Madam Mitrofanova. And now I give the floor to the moderator of our discussion, Mr. Fyodor Lukyanov. You are welcome.
Thank you very much. That's really a remarkable day and remarkable event. I'm very honored to moderate it just now. Yes, as Mrs. Mitrofanova just said, we got used to be online almost all the time. I must say, from my personal perspective, I enjoy it a little bit more than to move all the time around and to spend a lot of time on transportation and unnecessary meetings. So I really hope that this format will survive. Not to talk about opportunity to meet people whom normally we could not expect to meet that easily. And today's panel, today's lineup of speakers is such a diversified, just thanks to pandemic. Sorry to say it. We have quite an unbearable task today because the topic of our panel is such a big one that there is no chance to cover it even if we would spend several hours online. We will not do it, so I hope that we will make it as mentioned in our program within 2 hours. So that's why I would ask all distinguished speakers and participants to be as concise and brief as possible. I hope we will have rather an interactive discussion than a lineup of statements, especially as the range of issues connected to our topic is almost endless. So let's try to start with this discussion, and I really hope that we will be able to continue that in this form or another form during the next period. So we start with our first, how to say it, sub panel or sub discussion, which is mostly about public diplomacy. For me, I've always been very much interested in public diplomacy, but to be very frank, I never could fully grasp what it was, because public diplomacy is everything. So any contact can be subscribed to this phenomenon. At the same time, when you start to try to define it, so you get a little bit problem with that. Now, as political life has been paralyzed for a while, and the political agenda is not disappearing, of course, but is becoming much more complex, I think public diplomacy gets even more important than before. But certainly in this new post-pandemic world, it should be different, and it should be much more practically oriented than it used to be. And hopefully we will find ways how to avoid unnecessary formal things, which, to be very honest, were part of official public diplomacy before, and we'll go to something which will really help us to navigate in this new world. So having said that, without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Gromyko, who is director of Russian Institute of Europe, Russian Academy of Science. Institute of Europe, which is one of the most respected Russian academic institutions, is really embodiment of public diplomacy activism. So many conferences and contacts. So Alexei, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me well?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues. Let me say how thankful I am for Vera and her colleagues to make us gather in one place. Although this place is not material, but our emotions, our thoughts are very real. And I hope that something what we are going to say and share with each other will be of use for public diplomacy, for political science, or for some other spheres of our life and existence. Well, I was thinking hard what to say under the umbrella of public diplomacy, and I join further in saying that public diplomacy is something what has many names and many interpretations, but there is one very important category which accompanies the notion of public diplomacy, and this is solidarity. So let me say a few of words as Fedor asks us very shortly on solidarity. And first of all, I would like to remind us that before 2020, key problems which we inherited from the period of great recession had not been solved. And it seems to me that the pandemic leads to even more difficult, harder times. In general, we can say that both systemic and structural changes in international relations, in global and regional governments, deepen the trends which became entrenched in previous years and even decades. And I would like to define 4 or 5 lessons which we can draw from the pandemic from the point of view of solidarity. And my first point is that COVID-19 has demonstrated true colors of nation states, how they behave. And this is the phenomenon of national egoisms, which specialists in European affairs discuss so often. But instead of castigating this notion of national egoisms, I would like to say that, in fact, it is normal. It is normal when solidarity is expressed on the national level, on the level of local communities, and only later on the interstate or international level. This is logical and unavoidable. A core role of nation states in providing security to their societies does not contradict the importance of international and global cooperation. And we saw it very vividly, how nation states became the front line of fight against COVID, and then the interstate and international cooperation joined up. The second lesson from COVID is that the role of the state regulation, both visible and behind the scenes, has been growing and is growing. And it is true for the sphere of market relations as well as for the sphere of social life, of social processes. The third lesson is that those nation states have been more successful during the pandemic, which have a high level of resilience. Resilience these days is a very fashionable word, but from my point of view, a very important component of resilience is solidarity, cohesion, something what is very close to these expressions. But what does it mean still, resilience? First of all, resilience of the society is cohesion, a sense of trust between people, resilience of values, including solidarity, availability of voluntary help. We see that the role of a nation state is growing, but it does not mean that societies should rely more on state help. It seems to me that the pandemic demonstrated that societies should rely less on state help, but at the same time, state efficiency and efficacy and ability to render services to the communities should also become much more professional. And the fourth lesson, from my point of view, is a value of collective actions. When any society is hit very hard by any problems, drama, tragedy, only collectively it is possible to overcome a problem. No matter if you are a supporter of collectivism or individualism, etc., etc. Collective action is something what is the foundation for a solution of any major challenges for our countries. And here, public diplomacy plays a huge role. Humanitarian medical aid was of a crucial importance for many countries across the planet during the pandemic. And COVID-19 gave us a chance to demonstrate if we are more than families, local communities, or nation states, if we have a sense of much broader solidarity, which, by the way, in a not so distant past was called internationalism. Well, from my point of view, from my very humble point of view, that was a very frustrating experience when Russia and, of course, many other countries which sent a humanitarian and medical aid to other countries hit very hard by the pandemic, were accused of all sins, of a divide and rule policy, of hypocrisy, and even of occupation in case of Italy. Well, when the pandemic started, I thought it was a bright opportunity for different nations and states to overcome at least some differences and not to use this drama for, you know, for further information warfare. I should say that, alas, in most cases, solidarity and public diplomacy, different expressions of public diplomacy, was accepted in states which already are on good footing. But if there are certain geopolitical problems, then in most cases, expressions of solidarity were rejected in mass media, in political classes as a trap, fake, deception, humbug, hoax, call it as you like. And unfortunately, I'm an optimist by nature, but unfortunately the pandemic has been used much more for competition than for solidarity. And the last 10 seconds, that does not mean that that we should drop, you know, our efforts and endeavors. This probably demonstrates that we should, you know, we should become much more resilient and willing to use public diplomacy and the notion of solidarity than it has been a practice for so many years. It seems to me that this period of the last at least 30 years of political and economic neoliberalism, not liberalism, but neoliberalism, you know, has played a very negative role in how people interact, how they treat each other, how states treat each other. And let's hope that the pandemic still, and some lessons which we can draw from the pandemic, still will make us become more careful in discerning what is propaganda and what is solidarity, where our feelings are true and genuine, and when we can blame our certain actions as divide and rule policy, as occupation, as fake. Let's try to change the world a bit, drawing these very hard lessons from the trauma and drama of the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexei. It's of course absolutely correct to say that solidarity is exactly what we need these days, and certainly afterwards. The question is solidarity with whom and in which forms, because it seems that pandemic didn't change international environment. It catalyzed international environment as started to emerge well before this calamity. And unfortunately, solidarity now is primarily being discussed not between states, but within societies. And we see that many societies are being confronted with significant problems inside. Russia is not an exception, but I must say that our experience in this regard was better than I expected. When we look at other countries, we see quite negative trends. And it seems to me that solidarity inside will be much more important in maybe months or even years to come than solidarity between states, which can create completely different atmosphere for international cooperation. Although, of course, no doubt, cooperation will be needed at any circumstances. So I would love to give the floor to Mrs. Stoll, representing College of Europe, which is the most esteemed institution in Europe of the European integration. And I think the European integration is very much in the focus of attention now nowadays, because we got used to see Europe as an example of very much advanced solidarity between states. Is it the case now? Has it changed? And most importantly, how it will change in the future? That will be quite interesting to hear. Please.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, first of all. It's a pleasure to be here. And your question just brings me to the first lesson that Professor Gromyka already said. As we saw also in the European Union, there has been, under the pandemic crisis, a tendency for many states to look inside first. There was a little bit of a chaotic border closure process in the European Union. There were a lot of hiccups in how to deal with the pandemic. I think this has become very clear. Now, the European Union as such, of course, lacks the competences when it comes to closing borders or even in public health. It's a shared competence, so there are some limits of what the EU institutions could have done, but it took them too long to react, but it has been slow. But now I think they have launched a lot of initiatives. Solidarity inside, solidarity also outside of the European Union. So it has been slow in coming, for sure, and too slow, but it is coming. Well, I was a bit intrigued also by your introduction that what is public diplomacy? We don't really have a definition that much. So it's true, there is no standard definition. I've been thinking that normally it could be seen as a government's, or let's also say the European Union's process of communicating with foreign publics in an attempt to create some understanding for their ideas, their institutions, their policies and culture. So it is also about building trust, as was already said. And showing solidarity, be it, for example, in the form of humanitarian aid, can be part of it. Humanitarian aid is supposed to be impartial, neutral, and non-discriminating, so no strings attached. And in that sense, public diplomacy is all about soft power as well. So in a nutshell, you probably all know John and I's definition of soft power. It's about attractiveness. And that can then all be together, I think, as part of a definition. And as was also rightly said, is that what is public diplomacy not? Well, it is not just nation branding, like how a government is trying to differentiate its countries, it position itself, for example, for tourism purposes. It's not about lobbying. It's also not about propaganda or disinformation. So this is, in my understanding, not what public diplomacy is about, or should be, let alone should be about. And in order to be effective, I think that's maybe also an important point. I think public diplomacy has to require credibility. So it has to be credible action in order to win the hearts and minds in the long run. So it must really be legitimate, credible, and for that purpose, it really has to embody the key norms or the key identity of a society that is being represented abroad. And then these foreign publics must find these norms attractive to respond to it. Now, of course, today we live in a very digitalized world. It has been said also before. So there are many actors involved, and everybody can immediately always know what's going on in other countries through constant media coverage and social media coverage. So that makes public diplomacy also a bit more challenging than it might have been in the past, when we were mainly talking about sports events or cultural events, etc. So it has become much more complex. And I think that in the era of pandemic, governments will be charged by their citizens, by foreign citizens, of how well they have handled this pandemic and also the consequences of this pandemic, such as the economic downturn that we are all experiencing already, and also the social inequalities that have been, as somebody said, accelerated already by this process. So how they have been handling the crisis, and some governments have been late or have been handling it not as good as others, and also how they have shown international solidarity. I think that's a second component of how this pandemic will work out, also in terms of soft power in the future, and also to contribute to international efforts to address the consequences of the pandemic afterwards. I think this would be some of the main components, let's say, of soft power that is linked to public diplomacy, in my view.
Thank you very much. May I have a follow-up question to you? You mentioned the notion of attractiveness. Who is attractive nowadays? Can we say that somebody, after this experience, which was pretty terrible, can we say that somebody is more attractive than others? Or maybe everybody now is quite disattractive?
Equally disattractive. Well, it might depend on whom you ask. But if you look at the handling of the pandemic, of course, you had very different models. I mean, some countries have been hit harder than others, so it's also a bit unfair to compare, maybe. But there has been this big blame game going on, in particular between the US and China, about, you know, where the virus originated from, who's to blame, basically. And it's a big ping pong game of trying to say it's your fault, but everybody has been reacting maybe in suboptimal ways. And I think it's important to learn the lessons from that. What can be done better, the better time? How can resilience, as was already mentioned, be strengthened in order to avoid such bad or late reactions in the future that have ranged from trying to cover up what happened to denial of what's going on, or whether it's just a flu or something else, and whose fault it would be, and what should be done, and whether we should go into a lockdown, how long we should go into a lockdown, whether this impacts the citizens' freedoms and rights too much. I mean, we have court cases in Europe going against the government's measures because they've taken too long, or for some, they thought it wouldn't go fast enough. So it depends on whom you ask. But I think the important thing is that we learn from this, and also that, I mean, has highlighted a lot of vulnerabilities. In Europe, for instance, there's a lot of talk about critical supplies, and you know, all these masks or medical equipment was not, or pharmaceuticals were not even produced in Europe anymore. They were outsourced, in particular to China and other places, because of cheap labor. There's a lot of talk whether there should be reshoring, bringing some of the production back to Europe, in order to be better prepared for maybe a next pandemic that could happen. But of course, this is always a fine line, because it should also not lead to protectionism. I mean, there's a reason why these things have been outsourced. And actually, the European Commission now talks about open strategic autonomy. So finding a balance between having what is needed, like stockpiles, and having still the possibility to import and to take advantage of comparative economic advantages in trade. So to find a balance between just-in-time delivery and just-in-case preparedness.
Okay, thank you very much. I read somewhere recently that in Mongolia, there is a zero lethality of coronavirus, so maybe Mongolia is more attractive than all of us in this regard. So I would love, with great pleasure, to invite Pavel Shevtsov, the acting head of Россотрудничество, to join our discussion. You are in charge of the whole public diplomacy from recently. And in particular, since we already touched upon issues like education, and whatever happens politically, education should continue, and education cannot be nationalized anymore. It should be interaction, cooperation, otherwise each country will certainly be disadvantaged, the country which will try to separate itself. What is your experience? How do you see this possibility of public diplomacy and the level of for example, universities, or maybe on the level of regions, cities, because we see that those communities are now also, because of pandemic, much more empowered and bear much greater responsibility.
Да. Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Спасибо большое, господин модератор. Я, с вашего позволения, на русском языке, потому что так требуют определенные правила. Уже Элеонора Валентиновна Митрофанова достаточно много рассказала о той деятельности, которая ведет Россотрудничество по разным направлениям. И мы, как агентство по развитию именно гуманитарных отношений между Российской Федерацией и иностранными государствами, очень большое внимание уделяем как раз публичной дипломатии. И большое спасибо организаторам сегодняшней дискуссии, потому что эта тема, как нам кажется, очень важная, и обсуждение ее, чем чаще эту тему мы будем обсуждать, тем больше мы будем находить и взаимопонимание, и точек соприкосновения именно здесь, и понимание того, какими путями, какими инструментами нам надо пользоваться для того, чтобы развивать общественную дипломатию, да, публичную дипломатию, и чтобы это стало реальным инструментом сближения государств. Я хотел бы в своем выступлении остановиться на двух аспектах. Первое, это, конечно, университетская среда и высшее образование. Как многие знают, наверное, Россотрудничество является инструментом набора иностранных студентов за рубежом в рамках осуществления правительственной квоты правительства Российской Федерации по обучению иностранных студентов в России. И, конечно, пандемия внесла а сейчас как раз-то вот весной и отчасти в начале лета традиционно был период набора иностранных студентов, проведения собеседований. Хочется сказать, что в этом вопросе у нас задействованы 182 страны. То есть мы из 182 стран в мире набираем иностранных студентов. Это такая как бы общая мировая практика, и все крупные державы образовательные аналогичную политику проводят. И, конечно, пандемия внесла очень серьезные коррективы в эту деятельность. Вот сегодня господин Громыко говорил о тех уроках, которые нам преподносит пандемия, да, и те там решения и риски, с которыми мы там сталкиваемся. Я могу сказать, что мы, как Россотрудничество, тоже столкнулись с достаточно серьезным вызовом, и могу сказать, что это преподнесло нам там очень серьезные уроки и заставило нас достаточно оперативно перестраивать свою деятельность, потому что, наверное, представляете, провести собеседование в 108 одинаково эффективно, быстро и с требуемым результатом в 180 странах, это достаточно, я бы так сказал, нетривиальная задача, и, ну, в общем-то, мы с ней активно справляемся. И мы считаем, что как раз-то взаимодействие на фоне не только высшего образования, а вообще образования, как бы, это очень серьезный такой инструмент общественной дипломатии, потому что люди видят, что даже несмотря на все очень непростые и тяжелые времена, Российская Федерация из этого вопроса не выходит, а, как вы знаете, российское образование является востребованным во многих странах мира. Это, конечно, в первую очередь и страны СНГ, и Юго-Восточная Азия. И сейчас идет активное развитие отношений у нас, восстановление отношений с той же Африкой, Латинской Америкой. Безусловно, мы, конечно, не забываем о Европе, и там последние годы намечается очень большой интерес в развитии с европейскими странами отношений именно как бы в научной дипломатии, да, и это тот существенный момент, потенциал, который мы хотим развивать. Но при этом мы здесь, в Российской Федерации, столкнулись с другим достаточно сложным моментом. Это большое количество иностранных студентов, которые обучаются в Российской Федерации, но которые не смогли по разным причинам или не пожелали покинуть Российскую Федерацию. И это, конечно, для системы был очень серьезный вызов, потому что многие студенты остались без средств к существованию, многие из них в связи с тем, что и система медицинской помощи была очень сильно, подверглась достаточно сильному напряжению, да, и сфера быта и обслуживания, в общем-то, претерпела очень серьезные изменения в связи с тем, что были многие предприятия остановлены, как во многих странах. И наша задача была здесь, конечно, чтобы студенты не попали в некомфортную для себя ситуацию и максимально безболезненно пережили как раз-то вот этот период, когда многие предприятия были закрыты, и и российские граждане находились на изоляции, и автоматически иностранные граждане оказались на изоляции. И тут очень хорошо себя проявили и российские университеты, которые поддержали иностранных студентов, да, и региональные власти, которые тоже обратили на это внимание, и несмотря на все трудности, которые у них у самих возникали, то есть включились в эту деятельность. И могу сказать, что каких-то достаточно серьезных нареканий по этому поводу не было, что само по себе хорошо. И в связи с тем, что регламент выступления достаточно сжат. И второй момент, на котором я хотел остановиться, мы, как Россотрудничество, помогаем развивать общественную дипломатию именно регионам Российской Федерации, потому что большое количество есть идей, энергии, сосредоточенные в регионах. Конечно, все регионы Российской Федерации по-разному подходят. Кто-то более активно развивает взаимодействие с иностранными государствами именно на уровне городов, муниципалитетов, регионов, кто-то менее активно. Но сейчас, конечно, очень сложно перечислять все эти кейсы, которые были до пандемии. И это, конечно, и Москва, и Петербург, и другие крупные города, и та же Казань развивали отношения с такими же городами, муниципалитетами в иностранных государствах. Но мы сначала достаточно сильно переживали или не понимали, как эта деятельность будет развиваться со стороны российских регионов, когда наступили достаточно серьезные ограничения. Но могу сказать, что это, конечно, было первоначально некоторое такое замешательство, но потом надо отдать должное, многие регионы очень активно включились в эту деятельность, и и проведение мероприятий, онлайн-мероприятий, конечно, в первую очередь, между органами власти регионов, муниципалитетов. Также и общественные организации, отдельно взятые люди очень активно включились в эту деятельность, и мы, как агентство по гуманитарному сотрудничеству, видим в этом очень большой потенциал. Как уже сказали спикеры до меня, что пандемия нас учит многим вещам, о которых мы, может быть, не то чтобы не думали раньше, мы просто не так сильно обращали внимание, но те кейсы, тот опыт, который сейчас появился именно межрегионального сотрудничества между регионами, мы сейчас многие этот опыт достаточно активно изучаем с тем, чтобы его проектировать уже и на те регионы, которые еще менее активно включились в эту деятельность. Но мы понимаем, что за этим огромный потенциал, и эту деятельность надо активно содействовать и помогать. И в заключение своего выступления хотел бы еще раз сказать спасибо организаторам. И это очень важная тема, и я уверен, что именно не только официальная дипломатия, но и общественная дипломатия является очень серьезным инструментом сближения стран. А исходя из того, что сейчас по итогам пандемии очень многие люди ищут как бы выхода в какой-то позитив, и как раз вот общественная дипломатия, показ того позитивного опыта, который есть в других странах, преодоления негативных последствий, может служить как раз вот этим мостиком, соединяющим наши народы и страны. Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. Yes, I hope so that the positive experience from different countries might serve as a bridge. At the same time, we see, as it was mentioned before, that the negative experience is also, unfortunately, becoming an instrument in attempt to forge a competition using this experience against each other. But of course, on the public level, it's simply not interesting. It's purely political thing. I'd love to invite Caroline Galacteros to join us. So you are in France, as I understand, and I read yesterday with big interest the big speech of President Macron, the first one after pandemics was more or less over. And I think he said several very interesting things, but that's just my observation.
Yes, okay, I can address that too. I can address that too, because it's part of the effort probably of public diplomacy, and first of all of assessing our problems, our internal problems. As you know, we have some problems right now with some movement trying to destabilizing the state, I should say, I could say. But let me first perhaps come back to the COVID-19. And of course, from my point of view, a crisis is always a tough moment, but also an opportunity. And we have seen, of course, many division, selfishness, but also good things, if I may say, even if they were not interpreted as they should have been. For example, we have seen, probably for the first time in my view, a high level of data sharing in the scientific community. I don't mean between the states, I don't mean with the WHO, but between the scientists worldwide, and from not the beginning of the pandemic, but probably from January, there was a data sharing. So after that, of course, the always current divisions and differences of interpretations and interests between nations have done not a good job already, but that was a fact. And I think that should be a starting point to enhance this cooperation for the next pandemic, because there surely be next crisis. And perhaps I would say that if we would be able to build, to settle, you know, how do we say, early warning system, not with the organization of the United Nations, but in Europe, for example, and between Europe, Russia, and Eurasia. That would be a good point, probably. Just around our continent, in our continent, that would be a good point. We have also to address what you mentioned, which is, in my opinion, a destabilizing process of the states and of some states in Europe. You have seen, of course, before the speech of President Macron yesterday evening, the movements such as those we have now acting in France, because this pandemic obviously has weakened the country a little bit, has shown some vulnerabilities, has shown some mistakes or errors or faults even. in the way the pandemic has been addressed by the authorities. And of course, as the more the state is weakened, the more it's easy to destabilize it. And for me, this is a big movement. This is not only in France, of course. This is a big movement in Europe and even in the States. Mutatis mutandis, because it's not really the same situation and the same structure of state. But this is a point we have to take into account very seriously, because this is the sovereignty which is at stake in the end. And also, I want to come back to what Ambassador Mitrofanova has said in the beginning of our meeting about the virtual culture, which is of course a very good news. Virtual education, virtual meetings, as we have one now, and as probably we will have more and more. But for me, it's certainly a big trend, a trend which will be more and more developed, but it's never the same as being in front of each other, as being just concretely together. And we don't have, in my opinion, to underestimate the human dimension of the link, because this is also cooperation. So of course, virtual culture, virtual cooperation, virtual education, MOOCs in every sense, it's very important, but it cannot be the only way of dialoguing, of having a dialogue, and of having a cooperation, because otherwise we will have a perception of similarity, but also something very too soft, too not real enough to understand really the perception of the other parts. So that would be my first remark, but of course I'm open to every question of you or of the other speakers.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we will speak about this really very interesting wave of, what is it, turbulences in several countries. And I would love to learn from our participants whether there is a real cultural shift or maybe more political movement, but we move to that later. I got a message that Henry Sardarian, who is one of our speakers, unfortunately has to leave us shortly. So maybe I would invite him to speak now before you should go. Are you here? Not anymore, or what?
He has gone. He has gone. He's left.
He's gone. He's
yeah,
gone.
As far as I see. Yeah.
Okay, then sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, then coming back to our discussion, may I ask all of you one question which came to our chat, and I think it's very important and relevant question. We speak about public diplomacy, soft power, but in the current atmosphere, basically everywhere, where are guarantees, or at least can we expect situations when those efforts undertaken by anybody, be it Russia, be it China, be it the US, European Union, who else, will not be interpreted as meddling and political attempt to influence other countries' domestic affairs? Because we see it over and over again, and it seems that soft power basically disappears because no one perceives it anymore in a positive way. Can I ask all of our participants to very briefly answer? Maybe Karen, you start.
Yeah, I start. Okay. Yes, I think it's a real risk because, of course, with this pandemic, we have experienced the necessity of the solidarity, but not the reality. And of course, the different agendas of nations, the divisions, the will of some governments, or not even governments, in fact, but probably groups of influence to diabolize or to victimize, on the contrary, another country are still alive. But if I may be a little bit optimistic, I would say that this pandemic has had a very, very important consequence. It has shown to everybody on Earth, practically, that solidarity is not a word, and individualism is not enough, because to stay alive, for the first time, you had really to make up your mind and to decide to be civic, to be protecting the others, to protect yourself. Directly speaking, if you don't wear a mask, okay, in France we didn't have masks, so it's another problem. But if you were not distancing yourself from your friends, from even your husband, your children, and certainly from your neighbors and or from anybody, you could have risk for yourself, which is something people have now a difficulty. They had before this pandemic difficulty to imagine that, because everybody is just self-centered, completely selfish, and especially in Europe, and certainly in Western Europe. And for the first time, they have made this link. So this is solidarity in act. In our dans nos frontières, in our countries, borders, of course, but also we have we can imagine that it has to be the same exactly on the level, on the world level. So this is a good point, probably from the point of view of the experience made by anybody, by everybody during this month.
Thank you. I hope so. Pavel, can you share maybe the experience of Россотрудничество? Because I know, and we see, all of us see that your work is being criticized in many countries, unfairly from my point of view, but still. So can we expect that the atmosphere will change to the better or to the worse in this regard? I'm sorry. Павел, вы слышали вопрос?
Yes, to active his microphone.
Can we switch on the microphone for Mr. Shevtsov? I'm sorry, the microphone is off. Okay, it's something technical, but maybe then we will be back later. So because the microphone is off and we don't hear you. Alexei, can you hear us? Can you address this issue?
Well, I would like to touch upon one point with respect to solidarity, and this is globalization and deglobalization, as well as resilience. Deglobalization in the past years has been discussed a lot, especially because of the Great Recession. From my point of view, take a notion of deglobalization in a very simplistic way. Globalization is something that not the pandemic, not any kind of troubles is going to reverse. But what we are speaking about is new mechanisms, a new model of globalization, which should become much more resilient and effective than the neoliberal model of globalization. And it seems to me that the pandemic has demonstrated that in terms of integration on the global level, this situation is deteriorating. So there is less solidarity on the global level. But if we go a bit lower to the level of regional integration, then the pandemic has demonstrated that on the level of regional integration, most probably the pandemic has been a powerful tool to make these regional integration projects much more resilient in the future. And for me, that means that solidarity on the regional level has gone up or will have to go up. So I think that in the nutshell, the situation with solidarity is not so bad. There is less solidarity on the global level, but on the lower level, it is clear that the pandemic is one of many challenges which obviously show to all of us that solidarity should get, you know, bigger, more tangible, more effective. And that gives me hope, even with respect to many different questions in the relationship between Russia and the European Union, or China and other countries. I think that on a lower level, the stimulus, the motivation of solidarity will help us to ease, at least to ease, certain local and regional problems which we have been experienced in the past 10 or 15 years.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are a little bit behind of schedule, so we move to the next sub-panel, which I think is one of the most interesting due to what we see around us. It was already touched upon a little bit, but Carolyn and other speakers about all those changes turbulent changes we are witnessing in Europe and the United States. This is certainly catalyzed by pandemic, but the real reason is very deep-rooted. So it's quite interesting to what extent this development, cultural development, social development will have impact on our ability to cooperate. And it seems that initially it looked like much more political development, but now I'm not sure. I doubt whether we are confronted with something like big challenges of 1960s in many countries, or maybe not. So may I ask Marco Martiniello to join us? Are you here?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, great. Oh, great. Yeah. Please.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I will just make a few statements about, you know, the impact of the pandemic on our multicultural societies. And basically, I would like to start by saying that, you know, the pandemic here too has revealed and accentuated pre-existing problems. So basically the pandemic has not necessarily created new problems for multicultural societies. So I'm looking at specifically that angle, but you know, they have, you know, stressed and reinforced things that were trends that were existing before. The first one is that, you know, considering the situation of what I would call unwanted migration in Europe, for example, and here there's a difference between Europe and the US. From one day to the other, everybody stopped talking about Lesbos and the situation of the refugees in the hotspots of on the Greek islands, as if, you know, it was solved. And basically, the reception crisis in Europe is here to stay. And this is maybe a break, 3-4 months break, but the situation is just as bad as it was before. But we have decided not to look at that during this period. The second element is that this pandemic has revealed the intensity of social and economic inequalities suffered, for example, by migrants. They have been hit more than local populations by unemployment, went back when it was possible to their countries, but also immigrants and ethnic and racial minorities have been more exposed to the virus than local population in many respects. Here, of course, it's difficult to document the situation in the same way in all European countries, because in some places we lack statistical tools to do it. But it's clear that migrants and ethnic minorities were concentrated before in DDD jobs, dirty, difficult, and dangerous jobs. And basically, it explains in part why, be it in the US, in the UK, or also in the country I'm in Belgium, they have been more severely hit by the virus. Also, to the extent that they live in more dense neighborhoods and very often live in very poor housing, it's been more difficult to basically to enjoy the luxury of confinement, you know. Many Parisian people from Paris, for example, as soon as they understood that the pandemic was serious, they left Paris to go to their residence in the green outside Paris. Migrants cannot do that. Ethnic minorities cannot do that. They are stuck in the center of the cities where it's more difficult to protect oneself. Also, we've seen a rise in racist attitudes and behavior. I'm talking here about Western Europe and the US. I'm not talking about Russia because I haven't followed the situation there. But in this part of the world, in the first days of the pandemic, we saw, for example, that anti-Asian and anti-Chinese hate discourse developed very rapidly. You know, some people even canceled their booking in Chinese restaurants because they thought they would get the virus by eating Chinese food in Brussels or in Paris. Complete nonsense, of course. But we also saw that the control of the confinement, of the lockdown, was different compared to in different neighborhoods. The intensity of police controls, for example, was different in migrant and ethnic minority neighborhoods. In Brussels, a young guy died during the police intervention. There is the case of Mr. Floyd, who really launched a new movement with a question mark. And so clearly this pandemic is a test for social cohesion and peaceful living together in multicultural cities. So this is more negative, but we've also seen very positive signs, new forms of solidarity, some of them symbolic, you know, new urban rituals. In many European cities, people were applauding at 8 o'clock, you know, to support the medical forces fighting the virus. And this was going on whatever the national origin, social background, or nationality. But also new relations of support developed at the local level. You know, people organizing themselves to go shopping, to visit the elderly, even though at a distance, were seen in many cities, and also in different countries, refugees were engaged in sewing the masks. The previous speaker spoke about the difficulty to find masks in some countries. Well, in Belgium, for a few weeks, it was, it was impossible to find masks. And so the citizens were asked to do that themselves, to sew masks. And in many cases, refugees did that as a sign of citizenship and willingness to participate and to share the effort in a very difficult period. And then, of course, there is this anti-racist movement. And Mr. Moderator, you asked the question, and I think that it could become, maybe we are living a turning point. Imagine that you were living in the 60s in an American city. When you are right in the movement, sometimes you don't realize it's an historic movement. But maybe what we are witnessing now is something new. If you look at the demonstrations all across the world, in many cases, there are people not only with African ancestry, but also many people from different skin colors and ethnic groups, people from different social and economic background. There's something there, a message that expresses, in my view, not only a disapproval of institutional racism, but also a reaction towards social inequality, and also a reaction to the way some politicians have dealt with this pandemic and with the possible consequences of that pandemic. So I don't know, I don't have a crystal ball, so I don't know what's going to happen, but I think that, for a certain amount of weeks, everybody was talking about before and after COVID, talking about the world after. How is going to be the world after? I think humans have the tendency to try to forget very quickly, and also to try to go back to what they see as a normal situation. And I think we can see that trend already now. All the nice talks about the environment and so on, have been put aside. We are creating more and more waste, also because, of the material to protect ourselves against the virus. The financial institutions don't seem to have changed radically their point of view. So at the local level, do these forms of new solidarity, do this, calls for a more inclusive and welcoming society, are they going to continue? Are they going to lead to policy changes? I have a question mark, and I will finish with that question mark. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's, I think, very, very interesting and important what you said. And I also had a feeling, being a total outsider, of course, I'm not a specialist on US situation, but it seems that to a certain extent, even for establishment, it's easier to address this question as a racial one, rather than to try to go to the deeper roots. And I fully agree with you that the real problem is social, but no one knows what to do with this. While in case of anti-racism, you at least can imagine what to do immediately to tackle this. But this is, of course, my very humble and unprofessional opinion. Irina Semenenko from Russian Institute for International Affairs and World Economy, please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Good.
Yes, yes.
Right. Dear colleagues, I'm very happy to be here and to be given the floor. And I would like to continue in the line that Fyodor and Marco have put forward and speak a bit about what is happening in societies today and whether we're at a turning point or not. We've been speaking a lot about trust, and this is actually one of the two important pillars of success in fighting against COVID. But there's another pillar that we have not spoken about at the moment, and this pillar is responsibility. So the second point is who is responsible for taking measures to fight the current situation. And I think that we are actually at a turning point. But the thing is whether this turning point will lead to a paradigm shift or not. I can suggest some ideas about how this could happen, but I'm not sure that there'll be enough driving force to do this, because this has to deal with responsibility. So first thing, continuing in the line that Marcos has taken up, I wanted to say that these divisions that you were speaking about are even probably deeper than just concerning the multicultural landscape of societies. Social inequalities have grown all over the world. We're living in a divided world, that's for sure, but we are living in divided societies. And we were speaking about divided societies before. I mean, we researchers, when we were speaking about, say, the ex-third world, but now we're speaking about deeply divided societies everywhere. I can't say about China, not much to that extent, although there are some very big divisions there as well. But commenting on all our societies, I can say that there are big divisions that have ousted class divisions, ideological divisions. First thing, we are witnessing a divisions around digital economy and involvement in digital economy. Now, some people are deprived and other people are not. Some people are in for creative, innovative digital learning. Some people are not. And about when we speak about digital learning, I've heard and commented on the point that probably digital learning in the near future will be for part of the poor population, whereas the non-digital learning will be a privilege. And this is no-go. This will lead us nowhere. I'm very much for digital learning, but it is only part of the problem, right? That's one thing. Second thing, I can't even enumerate all the divisions that we at the Institute of World Economy have been researching on, because there are ever so many, but I can say that they are widening. And apart from the digital divide, there's also the values gap. Now, we've been speaking about various gaps between say, different ideological groupings. But this is not the point today. Values gap in divided societies. Some people say are for solidarity, others are still for individualism, and they don't care two pins about solidarity and whatever. Some people, the younger generation say, are in for new modes of behavior, whereas the older generation, or at least part of it, are completely against this. And there's a huge generational gap in this sense. So the values gap actually is widening. And what can be done about it? Well, the demonstrations, the manifestations that we're having today, I think is part of this problem. One thing I must say is that, well, part of society now doesn't want to do any, to have any relations with what has happened before them, with history. And they're in the negative. So it's a fight for their own identity. And identity politics, I think, is at the foreground of what is happening today. If identity politics means group politics only, then this can be a very, very dangerous development. Because identity politics is not only about group politics. It's, American research of the 70s, 80s who came up with this conclusion. But identity politics is also about education. It's also about language policies. It's also about all the symbols we have in public spaces. And it's about dialogue. Whether identities are open for dialogue, whether they're inclusive or not. And I don't think that, well, multiculturalism has led us to inclusive identities, I'm afraid to say. There have been quite a few developments, positive in this sense, but we're still very much behind. And discussing race and identity is a huge issue in its own right. But I have not come up with any research dealing with racial identity. This seems to be a bad idea, say, in the research sphere, whereas race is important as an identity pillar. And this also has to be taken in mind, because we have not come to terms with this. So I was thinking that, I wanted to make the point rather, that solidarity is very important. And having said this, there are lots of new manifestations of solidarity that COVID has brought about on the local level. Neighborhood communities and all sorts of neighborhood interactions are one thing, and we have had it everywhere, from Russia to Western Europe and whatever. But probably this is not enough. Probably, well, involvement is not a value for part of society. And the question is whether, well, social involvement is considered a value. So I think that the values gap should be overcome by, could be overcome rather, by studying in depth humanitarian sciences, one thing. I'm not that much of an optimist in this sense, but I think that this has to be, because it's important for changing people's minds and for turning people's minds to responsibility. And this responsibility idea brings me to a second point, very short point that I want to make because I'm running out of time. I think that we can think about a paradigm shift. And I think that we experts, we can't sort of bring forward this shift, but what we can do is introduce some points for analysis and for discussion, to bring them to the forefront of the agenda, of the political agenda. And one thing is, that would be very important to my point of view, is to probably not depend that much on the idea of sustainability as a core of development, but to take up responsibility as a core of development. And by saying this, I mean three basic things. One thing would be to look responsibly to nature and to our economic development, and to try to work out a model where non-material resources, where the use of non-material resources, intellectual, would be growing. I don't mean that we can do without others, but I think that these resources can have a huge potential that we're not using to the full. Second thing is effective governance. Now, there's a lot of discussion about this, and I can't go into this because of lack of time. But one thing that we have to bear in mind is that effective governance means also empowerment. And it means involvement of different strata and different groups of people and individuals. But the third and the most important part of this paradigm, as far as I see it, is the individual level. Now, how can individuals be responsible? And are they prepared to be responsible? And I don't think that this is a thing that we can solve in one day, but we can put forward this question because there's a question of moral accountability of people to nature, to each other, and between groups and between each other. And I think that this would be probably, well, if we can put forward these ideas to people who are responsible for making decisions, maybe we can contribute at least a bit to overcoming divisions in societies, because at this point I see them growing. And this is a sad development, not of COVID, but of the general development that we're having. Thank you. And sorry for the phone. Sound. No sound.
Sorry. Thank you very much. I think it's a topic for next series of seminars about accountability, personal responsibility, and so on. I saw somewhere recently a very good notion. Somebody described certain countries as the political system which is accountability resistant. And I'm afraid that many of systems now can be seen in this way. Russia is not an exception either. Thank you very much. So Ivan Timofeyev represents the body which is the giant of public diplomacy in Russian foreign policy. So Russian International Affairs Council. Ivan, please.
Thank you very much. Further, it depends on how to define public diplomacy, but yes, we are trying to do something on this domain. So if track to and expertise is a part of public diplomacy, then yes, of course. And we are doing quite a huge job with Russian universities. We have recently conducted quite an interesting seminar with Россотрудничество on the promotion of our universities in the international internet. That was a really great event, and in this sense, yes, of course, we are trying to contribute to the efforts of our partners in Россотрудничество and other institutions concerned. So I will try to be brief and take a ball from you further on the issue, on the question whether COVID-19 is just a trigger, or is it a reason for a great transformation? Well, naturally, the answer is yes to both hypotheses. We can definitely regard COVID-19 as a reason for a number of fundamental events in the current world. Some skeptics in this regard say that COVID-19 is, of course, incomparable with Hispanic flu or with the plague in the Middle Ages. And true, plague caused quite fundamental social changes. One of the points is that plague increased dramatically the price of labor, which was a prerequisite for the emergence of capitalism in early modern ages. So I don't think that COVID-19 would cause directly similar transformation, and we will get a new kind of economic systems. At least we cannot verify this by means of contemporary science at this current moment. But what is clear is that there are already a number of direct impacts of COVID-19 on different institutions. And the first and the major example I have in mind is, of course, elections. We will have elections in the United States. There will be elections in a number of European countries. There are elections on the constitution, the plebiscite referendum on constitution in Russia. So the question and necessity is to use electronic vote to supply this procedure. And well, this is quite an unprecedented situation. The questions about security, the questions about the secret of a ballot. And in case of the US, things are even worse, because the US politics has been traditionally dominated by face-to-face electoral campaign with these numerous meetings with the electorate, with people in different states, in the cities, etc. So now they have people on the streets, but not on the rather on the streets, but not on the electoral meetings. And I anticipate in the future the moment when some hackers or computer enthusiasts would expose databases on elections results in country A or country B, and this would be a great hit on the idea of secret ballots, on the constitutional right, on secret voting, etc. I would remind that in 2015, hackers, which supposedly were from China and associated with Chinese government, according to the view of American government, stole several dozens of millions of dossiers of American citizens. So I'm not a sophisticated person in technology, but I don't see any obstacle to expose this data on elections. And that would change, that would be a game changer. Of course, COVID-19 triggered a number of things which have been boiling under the carpet for quite a long time. The events in the United States were spurred by the aggression which accumulated during COVID-19 and the growth of unemployment, etc. But all the contradictions were there. The similar things we have witnessed them. We had witnessed them before. So it's not a surprise. It's just a trigger for the explosion of the old contradictions. Same is about US-China relations. Personally, further, I remember our brief discussion on whether the US-China confrontation is serious. And well, I must confess you were right in this debate. I underestimated the potential for the escalation, and COVID-19 showed that this escalation may be quite fast, and it may be much faster in the future. And COVID-19 played a role. So we all see how active, how strong are the anti-Chinese moods in China, and well, it shouldn't be underestimation. And same is about European Union. Well, problems there are in terms of European integration are also quite acute. I'm not sure that this is a fundamental threat for European integration. This is a case for many Russian experts who approach Western institutions as stronger in comparison with the state they really have. But of course, Brussels would have to adapt to this state of affairs too. And last but not least, I would like to get back to the question whether the soft power is becoming rather a negatively perceived thing globally, whether it is becoming an instrument for interference, etc. Well, this risk is growing, of course, and I wouldn't connect it to COVID-19. This is a long trend, and we in Russia know this quite well. We faced the complication with the United States after the elections in 2016 on this, and well, I mean, there is a huge mess in the heads. Because initially, when there were growing accusations of, for instance, Russian soft power policy as a mean of interference, I was thinking that these people are cynical, that for them this is just a political rhetoric, and unofficially they would say, "Come on, this is just our business. We don't think that things are like that in reality." But I was quite frustrated when I exposed that they think that this is true, that they are not cynical, but they are sincere and active at the same time. So this is a real danger. We have a growing number of people who are sincere and who are wrong, who are sincere and who are active at the same time. That's a real problem. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ivan. Yeah, about cynical, non-cynical, I think those who are only cynical, they never achieve real success. To be really successful in blowing up everything, you need to be a true believer, and this is what happens. That we sometimes underestimate in Russia, being maybe cynical themselves, how deeply rooted different stupid things are in the minds of many politicians. Okay, since we have not so much time left, but another extremely important part of our conversation connected to digitalization and cultural diversity, I ask Mark Franco, an old friend of mine, one of the best ambassadors of the European Union, the head of delegations in Moscow, to join our discussion. Mark, please, if you hear us, do you hear us? Yeah.
But we don't hear you.
Please switch on your mic.
Okay.
Yeah.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks for giving me the floor and inviting me to this debate on digitalization and cultural diversity and how remote cultural products will remain in demand after pandemic. first of all, it's clear that during the crisis, the Corona crisis and the lockdown, the offer of online cultural products has developed remarkably. This is an expanded offer that found an eager uptake in a wide public. But as I think it was Caroline who made the remark before, this whole virtual culture thing is not a new thing. It existed before, but it got a particularly strong boost during the Corona crisis and the lockdown. And the question is, what is going to stay with us? How strong is it going to be? Is part of it going to disappear? What kind of balance will there be in future between live and online performances? At this moment, of course, the live performances start again. It is important that now we find this balance, that also in the policy we find a balance between what is possible online and what is possible in live. So in fact, the first point I want to make is, and I think also somebody else already mentioned this, I mean, don't overdo it as far as the virtual culture is concerned. I would say nothing beats a live concert or a live art show. Because, I mean, the virtual experience, in fact, is an individual experience, but culture to a large extent is a social, a collective phenomenon. Going to a concert and sitting there surrounded by other music lovers that you can talk to, seeing the artists performing in perhaps a way which is not so, I would say, clinically perfect as a recording would be, that has been electronically and afterwards changed in order to kind of smooth out all difficulties and all mistakes. Sitting there and listening to that, I think, is still a better experience than listening it on a perfect rendering of a CD or on your screen. I mean, two parallels. First of all, I mean, if you look at a football match on television, you can see every detail and you can see it over and over again, everything that has happened. But nothing beats the participation in a football match in a football stadium. It was mentioned before that conferences now also can be made at a lesser cost with the best experts in the world gathering and talking and meeting online. Clear, but I mean, we all have been in conferences and we all know that very often the most important or interesting part of the conference is not during the conference, but during the coffee breaks, during the lunches and the dinners, and the contacts that you have there and the way that you can relate to people. I think it was Caroline who mentioned the human aspect. I think this human aspects in cultural experience is very important, and we should certainly make sure that this remains a key part of the cultural experience. Of course, online makes access possible. It is possible when you're in Antwerp or in Brussels, not just to go to the Flemish Opera or to the Monet for an opera. You can watch, if you like, the Boris Godunov from the Bolshoi, or you can hear Gergiev conduct the Mariinsky Orchestra from St. Petersburg. So that is certainly an enrichment. It is on top of what you normally have as a cultural experience. And this, I think it's certainly very worthwhile, and I would link it up now with cultural diplomacy, part of public diplomacy that has been discussed before, and I completely agree with Siglinde with the definitions and that she gave, or the limitations that she formulated, and the doubts that also Lukyanov Fyodor has formulated around public diplomacy. But I think cultural diplomacy can do a number of things by making access to cultures of other people and way other people think very important, I mean, in a very important manner, accessible across the world, and thereby, I mean, it's also a little bit big words, but increase understanding. But I think for that, it's a number of conditions are necessary in the future policy that we will apply to this cultural diplomacy and this the further development of access through online events. First of all, I think it's important that it is not the monopoly of big institutions. I think we have to make an effort as policymakers and also as big institutions to involve smaller, young, innovative groups that show what is living now. I mean, looking at a performance of an opera that was written in the 19th century is one thing, but living through or watching a performance which is contemporary, up to date, with young people, questioning things, dealing with problems in their own society, is, I think, very important for developing this understanding across the borders and let's say, contribute to this, to the events of the benefits of public diplomacy. At the same time, I think in cultural diplomacy, we have a bit the tendency to concentrate on what you could call high culture, that we forget popular culture. I think when we, from a policy point of view, start developing the online access to cultural events across borders, that we also have to imply and give a specific place to this, to popular culture. A last point is perhaps a legal point. It is important that in all this discussion, the interests of the artists are not forgotten, and I'm talking here specifically technically about copyright. Copyright for uploading, downloading, streaming is a very complex topic, particularly if it extends across borders. And I think that is an area where we should work on, so that not only can we watch across borders what is happening in other countries and listen, I mean, get some information about the topics that are being discussed and how they're being discussed in a particular society, but also that the artists involved get also the benefit from their performance. So that was kind of the main points I want to make. First of all, virtual culture is okay, but let's not forget live experience. Secondly, access across borders is very important for everybody, so it's a good thing. We should certainly stimulate it. It plays a role in cultural diplomacy, but if we really want to play the role, we should involve not only the big institutions, but also smaller institutions and smaller groups of young people. We should not only look at the high culture, but also at popular culture and make sure that streams. And finally, we should make sure that the status of the artist through an adequate treatment in the copyright legislation is ensured. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. My personal experience during lockdown was that I never watched so many movies online, of course, because I never had time to go to cinema, but now it's possible. But I completely agree with you that culture cannot be replaced with the virtual version. To a certain extent, yes, but in general, it should be perceived personally and in certain with certain collective experience. Alexei Lebedev is with us, head of International Cultural Program Russian Seasons. So for you, that period probably was quite difficult, or not? Please.
Да, спасибо большое, уважаемые коллеги. Спасибо огромное, Вера Георгиевна, за то, что нам всем сейчас удалось здесь пообщаться. И я для себя очень много каких-то нужных вещей в рамках культурной дипломатии вынес. Действительно, проект «Русские сезоны» — это ключевой проект Министерства культуры Российской Федерации по представлению вообще российской культуры за рубежом. И в этом году мы достаточно амбициозно хотели представить, я думаю, что еще представим наш проект, потому что впервые за небольшую историю русских сезонов в этом году они должны были проходить в 3 странах, во Франции, Бельгии и Люксембурге. Где-то мы уже часть мероприятий смогли провести на площадках в этих странах и завоевать интерес, любовь зрителя. Но, к сожалению, с наступлением пандемии в марте месяце нам, да я думаю, что и не только нам, а всем культурным институциям во всем мире пришлось перейти на онлайн-формат. И мы сделали это одни из самых первых. 23 марта первые трансляции в рамках проекта Stay Home with Russian Seasons мы запустили на нашем сайте, на наших социальных сетях и на социальных сетях наших партнеров. Я рад, что в рамках нашего проекта нам удалось сплотить интересы практически всех участников русских сезонов, а это как ведущие коллективы, такие как Большой театр, Мариинский оркестр, Большой симфонический оркестр, Денис Мацуев, ну, действительно мировые звезды, так и коллективы региональные. Потому что одна из задач, которую мы стараемся выполнить, заключается в том, чтобы показать многообразие культуры нашей страны зарубежному зрителю. И мы также в своих трансляциях дали возможности показать и Архангельский северный народный хор, и Рязанский хор, и театры Республики Коми, и театры Башкирии, и так далее, и так далее. Я думаю, что мы не будем на этом останавливаться. На сегодня мы перешагнули 25-миллионную аудиторию, которая за все это время посмотрела все трансляции, которые мы подготовили. Буквально через несколько дней мы будем отмечать такой небольшой юбилей, 100 дней с того момента, как мы этот проект запустили. Но я абсолютно согласен со всеми предыдущими спикерами о том, что цифровизация, особенно цифровизация в культуре, это такая довольно опасная вещь, которая внутри себя содержит несколько положительных и, на мой взгляд, не самых лучших вещей. Если говорить о положительной тенденции, то тот охват аудитории, которые смогли показать русскую культуру, наш проект, или там охват аудитории, которая посмотрела выступление Мариинского театра, он, конечно, не сопоставим с тем, что мы могли бы показать, привести в эти страны, или с тем, что за такое количество времени зрители могли бы вживую посмотреть выступление оркестра или балета Мариинского театра. И это, безусловно, плюс. Плюс заключается в том, что люди во всем мире могут прикоснуться к культуре той или иной страны, прикоснуться к культуре того или иного любимого или неизвестного артиста. Но на сегодняшний день, я думаю, что у публики уже настигло такое перенасыщение всевозможными трансляциями, потому что помимо нас, помимо Мариинского театра, как я уже говорил, да, практически все культурные деятели и все культурные институции так или иначе перешли в онлайн. И здесь есть несколько проблем. Первая проблема, она заключается в качестве того контента или даже в качестве видеозаписей, которые используются и транслируются. Потому что, к сожалению, немногие участники культурной жизни мировой, они были готовы к тому, что офлайн мероприятия остановятся на такой большой срок, и просто дать возможность показать все то, что у них было записано заранее, порой это не так много. И второй момент заключается, безусловно, в авторских правах, с которыми мы тоже столкнулись. Поверьте мне, многие наши звезды, они, скажем так, давно перестраховались, и все, что касается видеотрансляции и защиты их авторских прав, там все в порядке. А проблема сейчас заключается в том, что весь онлайн-формат, который представляем мы, которые представляют наши коллеги, это, по сути, бесплатная трансляция. Но для того, чтобы в дальнейшем создавать какой-то качественный, интересный онлайн-формат, который, безусловно, я думаю, что и после окончания пандемии будет продолжать жить в культурной среде, в мировой культурной среде, его нужно каким-то образом монетизировать. потому что, как любое качественное произведение, как любая качественная постановка, это достаточно затратные вещи. И как скоро вся культурная жизнь в мире наладится, как скоро она сможет, я не побоюсь этого слова, начать хотя бы окупаться, потому что если мы говорим о таких крупных институциях, как, еще раз повторюсь, гастроли Большого театра или Мариинского оркестра, это достаточно большие деньги, потому что вывести коллектив 100 с лишним человек, заплатить им гонорары суточные и выступать такому количеству артистов перед в данный период времени перед неполными залами, ну, на самом деле это коммерчески невыгодно. И я знаю, что многие коллеги, в том числе и во Франции, просто вынуждены были закрыть свои театры до конца этого года, потому что они понимают, что качественный продукт для большой аудитории в наше время сейчас в связи с пандемией создать очень сложно. Поэтому, если говорить тезисно, то, безусловно, формат онлайн-мероприятий, формат онлайн-знакомства зрителей с теми или иными культурными институциями, выставками или, возможно, кинофильмами, он будет продолжаться, и это правильно, и это нужно. Но мы никогда онлайном не сможем заменить ту атмосферу, которую мы получаем, и те эмоции, которые мы получаем, приходя в зал, приходя в кинозал, приезжая на какой-то фестиваль, даже на открытой площадке. И пока мы это помним, пока мы это понимаем, наверное, вот все мы и культурно развиваемся. Спасибо.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is even in the most problematic atmosphere, which some of us can remember from the Cold War, the cultural exchange and cultural diplomacy could work. I'm not sure it will work as efficiently now, because at that time, any exchange between Soviet Union and the United States, for example, was such a great event, such an exceptional presentation, because they were rather rare. Now, with all due respect to states, culture is guided by so many different actors that they operate disregarded the political atmosphere. So on the one hand, it's great, it's very good, much better than at that time. On the other hand, it cannot replace the political demise, which we can see now, and maybe will even escalate in the future, not only between Russia and the West, but now also between China and the West. So we are online for 2 hours now, and I have one request. Artur Dimchuk, is he with us? He wanted to say something. No? Probably not. Then is there anything which some of our distinguished speakers would desperately need to say as a conclusion to our discussion? Because we touched upon so many issues that, of course, it's quite different to to choose, but still. If not, I think we can conclude with this for this time. This discussion was very rich and diversified. Of course, if we continue this series, I hope we will be able to focus a little bit more on particular issues and aspects. But certainly, as some of our colleagues mentioned here, the necessity to speak in this way might become very regular, because if not this pandemic, but something else will inevitably happen. And to discuss all possible forms of intellectual cooperation it's certainly in our common interest. I should congratulate Россотрудничество for this initiative and thank Mrs. Bunina for initiating this event. Thank you very much and hope to see you again some other time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fedor Lukyanov, for being our moderator today. Thank you, everybody, for being with us today. We have a lot of questions and your opinions published in our chat, and we'll try to send you our answers or answers of our speakers recently, and all the materials of our discussion today will be published on the website of the Russian Cultural Center in Brussels. So follow us on our Facebook, YouTube, and our website, RussianCenter.bu. And thank you very much, everybody, for being with us today, and see you later.